On the broadcast tonight, North Korea's rubber stamp parliament opens its first session under the Kim Jong-un leadership. It provides the world its first glimpse into the reclusive state since the shocking execution of his once powerful uncle. South Korea is pushing to purchase roughly 10 low-altitude radars from Israel to better detect small unmanned aerial vehicles and thereby counter threats posed by North Korean drones. And the U.S. issues a stark warning that Moscow could be orchestrating another Crimea-style intervention in eastern Ukraine. Early edition at 6 begins now.
당신의 유럽은 어디였나요?
Excellence in flight. Korean Air.
It is 5 a.m. in Washington, 5 p.m. in Manila, and 6 on a Wednesday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gun-young.
And I'm Daniel Che. Thank you for joining us.
Now, our top story this Wednesday afternoon, as South Korea is wasting little time bolstering its air surveillance system after discovering 3 probable North Korean drones on its territory in recent weeks.
Right, the no price tag is too high. Seoul wants to buy some seriously advanced radar systems from Israel that should help the South Korean military detect any unwanted visitors in the sky. Our Hwang Ji-hye starts us off.
The discoveries of 3 suspected North Korean drones in less than a month on South Korean soil has prompted Seoul to take action. The government said Wednesday that it would be adopting Israel's tactical air surveillance radar system. A government source said an emergency budget of around $19 million will be drawn up to purchase 10 low-altitude RPS-42 radars and other surveillance equipment this year. They will be deployed at key government facilities, including the presidential office and on the West Coast next year. South Korea's current radars are not capable of detecting the North's small-sized drones, but the newly adopted Israeli system is. It can detect all types of aerial objects as small as half a meter in size within a 30-kilometer radius and has an altitude range of 10 kilometers. The South Korea military has been under fire for allowing the unmanned aerial vehicles to infiltrate its airspace, which represents a national security threat. In another effort to boost the nation's military readiness, Korea has asked the U.S. Defense Security Cooperation Agency to purchase more than 100 advanced missiles. The agency said Tuesday that it had notified Congress of a possible sale of missiles, equipment, and parts to Seoul. South Korea plans to buy 76 Sidewinder Block 2 missiles and 32 captive air training missiles at a cost of nearly $100 million to help counter threats from North Korea. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
So the recent discovery of those drones has raised concerns of holes in South Korea's air defenses. Seoul's defense minister appeared before lawmakers this Wednesday to explain what Seoul was doing to fill the gaps. Here's Arirang News political correspondent Kim Jong-un.
Parliamentary Defense Committee lawmakers gathered Wednesday to hear what measures the Defense Ministry has drawn up to counter the threat of North Korea's unmanned aerial vehicles.
We are worried that the drones may have attack capabilities, that they may even be loaded with nuclear warheads. What measures have you prepared?
The suspected North Korean drones do not have the ability to strike targets. They can't be used for acts of terror. But we will quickly reinforce our defenses to better detect and defuse any enemy assets.
Part of the plans Defense Chief Kim Jong-un laid out include buying advanced low-altitude surveillance radars and anti-aircraft guns. The government is also mulling over providing financial rewards to anyone who reports spotting a drone. But lawmakers also wanted to know why the Defense Ministry wasn't prepared for an infiltration of small-sized drones in the first place.
Small North Korean drones have been flying around the front borderline since 7 or 8 years ago. Don't you think we've neglected this fact?
We've been preparing for drone threats since the early 1990s, but we had prepared for small drones that are more than 5 meters in length. We hadn't received reports of drones smaller than 2 meters.
During the meeting, lawmakers urged the Defense Ministry to not just rely on the purchase of low-altitude surveillance radars from Israel, but to also launch a colossal revamp of the country's air defense system. As for the North Korean threat of a fourth nuclear test, Defense Ministry officials said they were monitoring developments at the North Punggye-ri nuclear site and would work with the UN to impose harsher sanctions in the event a test is carried out. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
Speculation is on the rise that South Korea, the U.S. and Japan, all countries pushing North Korea to dismantle its nuclear program, may be ready to take a new tack, one that includes more flexibility. But as our Chosun reports, it just may be too early to jump to any conclusions.
South Korea, the U.S. and Japan are considering scaling back the preconditions they want met before resuming talks with North Korea over its nuclear program. Following a meeting of the three countries' nuclear negotiators this week, a South Korean official told reporters in Washington that they're looking at a variety of ways to resume talks with Pyongyang. The official said the three parties are looking at the conditions with a little more flexibility in mind, and that the ways in which North Korea shows sincerity about giving up its nuclear weapons program could be up for discussion. The three nations, together with China and Russia, have been trying to denuclearize the North under the six-party framework for more than a decade. But the six-party talks have been suspended since late 2008 because of repeated provocations by Pyongyang. In return for U.S. food aid 2 years ago, North Korea agreed to suspend its missile and nuclear testing, place a moratorium on its uranium enrichment, and allow international inspectors into its nuclear facilities. Washington and its two main Asian allies have been demanding Pyongyang take additional actions outside of the Food for Denuclearization framework before returning to negotiations. The official, however, said there's a need for further review and discussions with China, another key six-party member. He then said what's most important is stopping the enhancement of North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities and for the North to leave room for negotiations without carrying out further provocations. Experts in Seoul, however, caution that it's too soon to jump to any conclusions about a change in South Korea's position. Instead, they say this could merely be another message urging Pyongyang to act sincerely and return to the negotiating table. 최유선, Arirang News.
North Korea is holding its first session of the 13th Supreme People's Assembly on this Wednesday. The meeting is equivalent to a parliamentary session and will give the world a better idea about the changes in the regime's policies and power structure. Our Hwang Sung-hee reports.
North Korea's 13th Supreme People's Assembly session got underway in Pyongyang on Wednesday. It marks the first session of the rubber stamp parliament elected under Kim Jong-un's leadership. As widely expected, the young Kim was represented as the chairman of the powerful National Defense Commission, according to the state-run Korean Central News Agency. Other agenda items at the meeting include appointing officials for government posts and deliberating on this year's budget plan. The first session of the country's highest legislative body is an occasion to find out who's in and who's out of North Korea's ruling circle, and speculation is that a major reshuffle could be in the works. Sources say Prime Minister Park Bong-ju, the country's economic policymaker, could be sacked to take responsibility for failed economic reform plans. 86-year-old figurehead President Kim Jong-un may step down after 15 years in office. Possible successors to the positions include Kim Jong-un, top policymaker in charge of inter-Korean matters, and Vice Premier Kang Seok-ju. The meeting comes as North Korea has been raising tensions on the Korean peninsula with a series of missile launches, artillery shellings, and threats to conduct another nuclear test. All eyes are on what kind of a message the regime will send to South Korea and the United States. 황성희, Arirang News.
We're all destroyed.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with experts on the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gon-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Proposal for talks and holding regular reunions for families separated by the Korean War. Their reason.
On a more somber note, a South Korean student who went missing in the Philippines last month has been found dead. Korea's foreign ministry says the female college student in her mid-20s was kidnapped in Manila on March 3rd while on her way to meet a friend. Her body was found this week badly decomposed. Philippine authorities have arrested one of her alleged abductors, but they believe at least 3 others remain at large. A total of 4 Korean nationals have been killed this year in the Philippines. Raising hopes once again in the search for missing Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, search teams have picked up new signals that may be consistent with the black box flight data recorder. Australian authorities heard 2 separate signals on 2 separate occasions Tuesday. The vessel had first detected pings on Saturday in the southern Indian Ocean. The officials are growing more confident that they are now looking in the right area. Search teams are in a race against time as the batteries of the flight recorder could run out any day now. The Boeing 777 disappeared on March 8, carrying 239 people. The search on Wednesday includes 11 military planes, 4 civilian aircraft, and 14 ships.
The U.S. issued a stark warning on Tuesday that Moscow could be orchestrating another Crimea-style intervention in eastern Ukraine. Now, this after pro-Russian forces cemented their control of a government building in the city of Donetsk, and there were claims that Lugansk protesters had taken up to 60 people hostage. Well, against this backdrop, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has suggested holding a 4-way talks with EU, Russia, and Ukraine. Here's our Kwon So-ah with the latest on the worsening crisis.
With no immediate end to the Ukraine crisis in sight, senior officials from the EU, the US, Russia and Ukraine will try to find common ground in 4-way talks next week, likely in Europe. It will represent the first such meeting since the crisis began. The talks were suggested by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry as he accused Russian forces of stirring up separatist turmoil in the eastern part of Ukraine. He told Moscow to back down or face tougher new sanctions that would target Russia's banking, energy, mining, and arms sectors. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen warned Russia too, saying a further intervention in Ukraine would be a, quote, historic mistake, and that it would lead to a further international isolation for Russia. The crisis worsened over the weekend when pro-Russian activists seized regional government buildings in 3 eastern Ukrainian cities. On Tuesday, Ukraine's Interior Ministry said it had detained some 70 people during an anti-terrorist operation in Kharkiv, but that protesters are still in control of a state security building in Luhansk. He says they are armed and holding around 60 people hostage. Protesters occupying a government building in Donetsk have declared a People's Republic of Donetsk and are planning a referendum to join the Russian Republic by May 11th. It's a potential powder keg as the polarization of pro-Russians and pro-Ukrainians in the 3 cities is greater than it was in Crimea, which Russia annexed a month ago. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Well, on a different note, Korean consumers are turning more and more to the internet to purchase products from abroad, and understandably so, as they can get much better deals.
Well, that's been going on for some time, and to reverse the trend and level the playing field for consumers, the government is stepping in. Our Song Ji-sun reports.
Import prices of these products are around $10, but the very same product on the shelf of a department store carries a price tag 4 times higher. That's the case with many imported products, after distribution margins and marketing prices are taken into account. To provide consumers with sufficient information and to stabilize prices, the government has added the import prices of 10 industrial products, like wine, strollers, and lipstick, to its publicly available list. The import price list previously included 60 food products. The Customs Office said the cheaper the import price of an item, the more expensive its retail price became, as a monopoly among domestic distributors meant no price competitiveness. This gap between the import and retail prices has led more and more Korean consumers to directly purchase products from overseas over the years, mostly online. Direct overseas shopping tripled from 2010 to $1 billion last year. The beefed-up import price list is only one change the government is making to support consumers. At an economic ministerial meeting on Wednesday, Finance Minister Hyun Oh-seok announced that the customs clearance process would be sped up to allow consumers to claim their purchased items more quickly. They will also be able to return their products purchased overseas with less fuss and get tax refunds more easily, thanks to simplified procedures. The government will also encourage free market competition among importers by facilitating parallel imports, all part of its goal to lower the retail prices of imported consumer goods by up to 20% over the next 3 years. 송지선, Arirang News.
Well, the recent depreciation of the Japanese yen has sparked complaints by Korean exporters who fear they are losing a competitive edge as Japanese goods are becoming less expensive in overseas markets.
That's right, but a new paper from the International Monetary Fund argues Korea need not worry. How plausible is this argument as the export market changed for Korean and Japanese products?
Well, joining us live in the studio for analysis is Dr. Oh Jung-gun, Professor of Economics at Korea University. Professor Oh, welcome to the program.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Now, this IMF paper argues that Korean exporters, Korea no longer needs to worry about the weakening yen as this will have a limited impact on the competitiveness of Korean products overseas. Now, do you agree with this assessment?
Well, that's difficult to agree. Actually, I'm very surprised to see this newspaper. So I read the original paper published by IMF. Actually, this paper is not original IMF official opinion, but IMF staff's personal working paper.
Right.
And then the paper, actually the journal interpretation that South Korea need not worry about the Japanese yen is quite strong because in the working paper they shows two findings. One is the impact on the Korean export of Japanese yen depreciation reduced by about 1/2 during the last 10 years compared with the previous 10 years. And then still the impact on the Korean export are still relatively higher than other Asian exporters. So I think this journal newspaper's interpretation seems quite strong.
So one big factor cited by the IMF report is the overseas production of major Korean items sold in foreign markets. So does this trend apply to most Korean industries, or is it only limited to export items?
Recently, automobile, semiconductor, and also the iron and steel products are being produced more than 50% overseas. So I think the overall major Korean exporting items are being produced overseas, more than even some items more than 70%, some items more than 50%. This is now general trend in Korea.
Now, another reason given by the IMF is that the growing differences of IT products being produced by Korea and Japan. Now, is it safe to say that the two economies are increasingly competing less in the same export items or in the same product categories?
Yeah, partly acceptable, but still we have many products such as automobiles, semiconductor, and also the iron and steel product, also electronic goods, are still competing in the global market with the Japanese ones. So I think we should take into account this part.
So what are some of the other factors that make Korean exporters less vulnerable to the all that's going on with the 1 yen movement?
Well, I think still we are importing a lot of Japanese part and intermediate goods to make final goods. So in that case, if Japanese yen is depreciated, our import price would become more cheaper. That I think that will be benefit. That will offset the adverse impact of Japanese yen of Korean export product.
Now, if currency fluctuations do in fact affect the price competitiveness of Korean products overseas, at what point, in your view, would we begin to see a real, I suppose, negative effect here in Korea?
Well, I think in this case, why many Korean economists and the Korean government are so much worried about Japanese yen due to the so-called Abenomics, is we have two very important experiences. Before 1997 crisis, Korean won was appreciated against Japanese yen more than 30%. Finally, Korean current account had deteriorated substantially, and then we had a crisis. Also, before 2008 crisis, also Korean won was appreciated against the Japanese yen more than 47%. At that time, also finally we had a crisis. Therefore, this time, during the last 2 years, since June 2012, still so far Korean won has been appreciated against Japanese yen, I think about 42%.
42%.
Therefore, many Korean economists and Korean government officials at this moment are worried about the impact of Japanese yen depreciation. Still, we are worried about another crisis will come on. That is a very important issue. So I think that's why I was very surprised to see this paper and also the journal newspapers seemingly too strong interpretation, because this paper also argues still impact of Japanese yen on Korean export still relatively higher than other countries. But Wall Street Journal said South Korea need not worry. This is too strong, I think so.
Right, so you think it's an over-evaluation of the IMF working paper?
Right.
A little bit too optimistic there.
Too optimistic,
guess we need
and
more
also
skeptics from
underestimated,
like us.
I think.
Underestimated. Well, it's good to see both sides of the possible future for Korea-Japan relations in terms of yen and won. Thank you so much for coming in, Dr. Oh Jung-gun. We hope to have you back here soon.
Welcome. Yeah.
Now, the World Wide Web has changed the way we interact, the way we work, the way we live. And like all inventions, there's always someone or something trying to change it.
So what's next for the web? Some of the world's greatest minds in the field have gathered in Seoul this week for an international conference to answer that very question. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
The 23rd Annual International World Wide Web Conference 2014 opened in Seoul on Wednesday. The conference provides the world with a forum to discuss the development of the web, the standardization of its associated technologies, and its impact on society and culture. At this year's conference, co-hosted by KAIST and the Korean Agency for Technology and Standards, experts from a variety of web-related fields address what roles the web plays and what opportunities and challenges lie ahead. Tim Berners-Lee, who first conceived of the World Wide Web in 1989, was among one of the forum panelists that discussed what to expect over the next 25 years. Berners-Lee is part of a movement called the Web We Want that argues for law and order, or a Bill of Rights of sorts for online freedom and impartiality. He said the openness of the web is currently under threat by big governments and conglomerates worldwide.
And we all start taking the web more for granted, then there will be other things that maybe that we get access to. So there will be questions like, will the incredible open software which allows you to get open courseware.
Berners-Lee goes as far as to say that the web as we know it today could suddenly disappear in the future, where larger entities would put more clamps on the freedoms we currently enjoy. He said the public needed to be more aware of the possibility. On Thursday, the forum will focus more on how to tame the web and its many dangers, such as privacy and security breaches. The forum held in Seoul runs until Friday. Kim Jong-un, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of our newscast. Thank you for watching. For our viewers in Korea, have a wonderful rest of the evening.
And a great start of the day to those of you in other parts of the world.
This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Moon Ganyang. We hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.